The Billionaire Triplets Take New York, written by E.T. Watson, narrated by Daniel Cuddy and Celia Stone, and Lucy Topps and Jim Swanson. Chapter 1.
I don't know how much they paid you, but this should be more than enough to keep your mouth shut. If you try to contact me, if I hear one word about this from anyone, it'll be the last thing anybody will ever hear from you.
Slam. Echo of the slamming door woke Lynn from her restless sleep. 10 years, and it still affected her. 10 years, and she recalled every detail as if it were yesterday, no matter how she tried to forget. The day she finally faced her high school crush. The day he broke her heart, and her world fell apart. 10 years ago, Evelyn Carlisle was the younger of 2 daughters, born to Emerson and Grace Carlisle. Her sister Marilyn was a true beauty queen, tall and confident. Evelyn, meanwhile, was plain, petite, and quiet. She could never network or socialize the way her sister could, having only one close friend throughout primary school. There was only one area Avalon truly shined, and that was music. Since she was 5 and had her first piano lesson, her instructors praised her as a rare genius, gifted. When she played, the rest of the world ceased to exist. It was just her and the music. She was hailed as a prodigy, and every party her parents hosted, she played for their guests. Little did she realize this scant attention was enough to stroke her sister's jealousy. Shortly after graduation, Evelyn won a coveted spot at Juilliard. Her sister insisted they go out and celebrate despite the fact Evelyn never drank before. She didn't know what alcohol was supposed to be like, and she never suspected that her sister would drug her or that Marilyn would throw her into bed with an unknown man. But that is exactly what her sister did. Mercifully, the event was blocked by a fog, and Ava had no recollection of the act itself. The next morning was traumatic enough. She woke with a pounding headache, intense thirst, and incredibly sore. Completely naked with a sticky wetness running between her legs, Ava clutched the blanket to her chest, trying to piece together the events from the night before.
Finally awake, are you?
Ava froze at the deep, harsh voice. She recognized it instantly. Silas Prescott. Throughout middle and high school, he reigned as the king. A track and field star, he maintained impeccable attendance and perfect grades. He was his parents' pride and sole heir to their business empire. Girls flocked to him hoping to be noticed. If he said more than 2 words to any of them, they would brag about it for a week. Every dance or social event, he appeared with someone new. Even her sister attempted to pursue him for a short time, but Silas had no interest in the daughters of his father's rival. A perpetual wallflower, Ava watched him from a distance and gently nursed her crush, knowing full well nothing would ever come of it. The last place she expected to see him was in a hotel room as she sat in his bed, naked.
I hope you're satisfied, because what happened last night is never going to happen again. In fact, last night didn't happen.
Ava shivered at his rage and disgust, unable to look him in the eye. She didn't even dare raise her head. If she explained it was all a misunderstanding, a cruel trick by her sister, would he even listen? He would only be more disgusted if he knew she was a Carlisle.
I don't know how much they paid you, but this should be more than enough to keep your mouth shut. If you try to contact me, if I hear one word about this from anyone, it'll be the last thing anybody will ever hear from you.
The door slammed with a finality she didn't dare breach. Tears she'd been holding in flowed freely. She shuddered with sobs while her heart broke in more pieces than she dared count. Ava had always known her love for him was one-sided, that he didn't even know she existed, but his utter disgust was not something she expected. When her tears finally slowed, she looked to the bedside table to see he had written a check for $100,000, leaving the pay-to line blank for her to fill in. The sight brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes, and it was several minutes before she calmed herself enough to get dressed. Unconcerned with her appearance, Ava left in a rush, bumping into the maid in the hallway. Muttering an apology, Ava hurried away without pause. Somehow, she managed to get home where she collapsed into a fresh wave of sobs as she tried to wash away the memory in the shower. Surely that should have been enough for her sister's revenge, but it wasn't. Anonymous photos soon blasted gossip pages with headlines like, "Golden Child Disgraced," "Music Prodigy Out of Control." Her mother broke down in tears and her father raged. Neither wanted to hear her side of the story, and they kicked her out without so much as a suitcase or even a jacket. With no money, she did the only thing she could think of and called her best friend collect. 3 hours later, Tracy Lamont arrived, driving all the way from Yale to rescue her. The drive back to Tracy's off-campus apartment in Connecticut was more than enough to relate the details of her predicament. Even though Tracy was a year older and a grade above hers in primary school, the pair had hit it off immediately. Daughter of 2 lawyers, Tracy was a tall, athletic girl with dirty blonde hair. There had never been any doubt she would follow in her parents' footsteps and actively pursued academics to ensure her predestined future. Throughout high school, she was Ava's only confidant and the only one she could rely on. After hearing the details, Tracy was ready to return to New York, fully prepared to punch Marilyn out. With a purple belt in Taekwondo, Ava had every reason to believe her friend was fully capable of carrying out the punishment, but she begged her to avoid violence. Instead, they bought 2 tubs of Rocky Road ice cream and watched romantic comedies until 4 o'clock in the morning. Ava thought the worst was over, but Juilliard rescinded her place, claiming she was no longer a good fit for their image. A few weeks later, she realized her period, which had always been like clockwork, was late. A quick home test followed by a trip to Planned Parenthood confirmed it. She was pregnant. Tracy demanded they return to New York to confront Silas, but Ava refused. Her warning still rang clear in her mind, and she didn't have the courage to face him. After a long weekend of soul-searching, Ava finally made her decision. She would disappear. Evelyn Carlisle was dead. Lynn Carter was born. With Tracy's help, she secured an apartment on the Lower East Side. It was a cramped 2-bedroom, far from the area's nightlife, but it was clean. She found a job at a nearby diner that time had forgot. It looked as if it had been pulled directly from the 50s, but the owner was kind and willing to work with her when the inevitable happened, and she gave birth to triplets. Little less than 8 months after her sister's betrayal, Lynn gave birth to a girl and 2 boys, Alexis, Sean, and Theodore. All were seemingly healthy. When Alexis turned 3, Lynn noticed she had trouble seeing in the dim light of the apartment. Several checkups later, she was handed down the verdict: retinitis pigmentosa. Her daughter was slowly losing her vision. They didn't know when, but eventually Alexis would be completely blind. There was nowhere to stop it. Maybe they could slow it down. Maybe. It was the first time Lynn broke down and cried in almost 4 years, but there was no way to help her daughter. Yet, if she thought the news could cause Alexis distress, she was mistaken. Alexis had a bright mind and an indomitable spirit, refusing to give in to despair. Despite Alexis's fortitude, there was no beating the disease slowly robbing her of her sight. For a while she wore glasses, but eventually her world faded to grey. She claimed she could still tell light from dark, but in order to navigate the world, Alexis now relied on a cane and her brothers. The trio had always been close, but knowing their sister was losing her sight only made them more protective. They were inseparable now, and no one dared pick on Alexis for fear of angering her dedicated guardians. Not that anyone would think to bully her. The kids attended Anna Silva Public School, where the trio quickly made names for themselves. Their test scores were continually above average. Though some complained they threw off the curve, the triplets' outgoing personalities made them popular. Both Sean and Theo were active basketball enthusiasts, with Sean also having a tech-savvy mind. But Alexis was the real standout. Like her mother, Alexis had rich chestnut hair and green eyes, and she was also a musical prodigy. When the kids were younger, Lynn used to play piano, buying a rather expensive keyboard to practice, but gradually she gave it up, but not before teaching Alexis how to play. Like her mother before her, Alexis drifted into her own world when she played, and everyone who heard it couldn't help but be touched. While her mother had been a wallflower, Alexis was outgoing and friendly, earning her quite a following. Lynn was happy her children were popular and well-adjusted. She couldn't hope for more, didn't dare to hope for more. Now they were in the 5th grade and would soon move on to middle school. Lynn hoped they would adapt to the larger school with their usual ease. With a sigh, Lynn pushed herself out of bed and hurried to the bathroom. It was 5:30 and the kids would be waking up soon. It was best to get her morning ritual completed before them, or else they would be late. After a shower, she dressed in the pastel pink skirt and shirt that made up the diner's uniform. Like the diner itself, it was also right out of the 50s. Tying her natural wavy hair back up in a half style, Lynn headed for the kitchen, microwaving sausage biscuits for breakfast. The boys would have 2 each, while Lexi and her mother would be satisfied with 1. Reaching for the milk, Lynn scanned the scant contents of the fridge. Aside from staples like milk, eggs and butter, the majority was stacked in styrofoam takeout containers from the diner. Gretchen was a kind manager, and Lynn felt enormously lucky. When the triplets were babies and up until they started preschool, Gretchen allowed them to accompany Lynn to work when she couldn't find a babysitter. Gretchen even purchased toys and games to keep them occupied during their mother's long shifts. Quite often, the older woman hovered over the toddlers like a protective grandma. Knowing how difficult it was to provide for 3 growing children, Gretchen often gave her the leftover food at the end of the day. She claimed Lynn was doing her a favor as the food would just be thrown out, but Lynn occasionally found whole meals, burgers, fries, hash browns and others completely untouched. Though Lynn could never bring herself to ask, she suspected Gretchen made some meals with the expressed purpose of giving them to her and the kids. It was an incredible act of generosity and charity that only worked as long as both parties willfully ignored it. Lynn made use of every charity she could, making regular trips to food pantries, thrift stores, and endured the silent ridicule of human services to receive food stamps. To this day, no one except Tracy knew the truth about their kids' parentage. Gretchen only knew their father was not in the picture, and even their birth certificates listed him as unknown. People drew their own conclusions. Mostly assumed she was some kind of working girl or extremely promiscuous to not know the triplets' father. Lynn didn't bother correcting them, as it would mean revealing the truth. Instead, she endured the shame.
Morning, Mom.
Alexis, always the first to rise, greeted. Morning, sweetie, Lynn said, setting down a plate with her breakfast on it, along with a glass of orange juice. With practiced ease, Alexis reached the counter and sat down without the need of her cane. In familiar settings, she could navigate by memory. As long as the furniture remained in place, she didn't have to worry about bumping things accidentally. Picking up her breakfast sandwich, Alexis munched contentedly. The older she got, the stronger her resemblance to her mother became. Even now, Lynn was certain anyone would recognize her brown hair and green eyes. Luckily, they were far from the circles Lynn used to inhabit when she still went by the name of Carlisle.
Morning, Mom. Morning, Lexi.
Theo and Sean yawned as they finally emerged. Just as their sister resembled their mother, the boys looked like miniature versions of their father. If she thought about it too much, she sometimes felt pains of regret and loss. Never wanting to burden her children with her own struggles, Lynn quickly squashed such thoughts. She would not let her genuine love for her babies be tarnished by the infatuation of her youth. If anyone from her past saw the boys, they would certainly make the connection. Even knowing this, she thought the chance was remote their paths would ever cross. She was no longer part of society's elite, and no one from that circle had reason to explore the dregs of society. Morning, boys. Did you get all your homework done?
Yep, we're good to go.
Good. Oh, Lexi, we have a doctor's appointment today. Don't forget, I'll pick you up from school.
Sure thing, Mom.
That means Tracy will get you boys, all right?
Yep. No worries.
They answered with mouths full of sausage, egg, cheese, and biscuit. The Billionaire Triplets Take New York. Written by E.T. Watson. Narrated by Daniel Cuddy and Celia Stone and Lucy Topps and Jim Swanson.
Chapter 2.
Okay, Alexis, stare straight ahead for me.
Dr. Erica was gentle as she shined a light and studied her young patient's eyes.
Good. Now, without moving your head, track the light as I move it.
Alexis's gaze flickered as she watched the light move steadily in and out of her limited range of vision. Dr. Erica nodded and turned to her computer, making notes. The steady clacking of the keyboard was the signal the examination was over. Alexis remained seated on the table while her mother anxiously waited for the results.
Well?
Lynn prompted when the doctor hesitated.
As you know, Miss Carter, Alexis's eyesight has been rapidly deteriorating.
The doctor said.
Alexis, be honest. How is your eyesight really? I can tell light from the dark.
Alexis shrugged. It was how she was able to track light, despite the gray fog that consumed her vision.
Honestly, though, it doesn't really bother me.
Lexi!
Lynn gasped at her daughter's nonchalant attitude.
Alexis, would it be all right if your mom and I talk for a bit? Sure.
Alexis said, getting off the table. Taking out a foldable cane that snapped to its full length, she used it to sweep the area in front of her to the door. Reaching it, she let herself out and headed to the nurse's desk where the waiting room gave her a place to sit. Once she was gone, the doctor turned to the anxious Lynn. Like everyone else, Erica had drawn her own conclusions concerning the children's birth, but having known Lynn for several years now, she realized the rumors surrounding the other woman couldn't be true. Lynn was a kind and genuine person. Her love for her children could not be denied. The kids hadn't missed a single appointment or booster shot. It was clear she sacrificed everything to ensure the kids remained healthy. In fact, aside from Alexis's chronic failing eyesight, none of the kids had ever suffered more than a cold. Such care just didn't fit the image of a promiscuous lady of the night. Undoubtedly, there was more to the story of the triplets' birth, but it wasn't a doctor's place to pry into the private lives of her patients. Once the door was closed, she sighed and said,
Miss Carter, I think we have to be realistic. You heard Lexi herself.
But it's not hopeless, right?
Degenerative conditions are progressive and very difficult to treat.
Erica explained.
The prognosis for them is inevitable. I hoped Alexis's blindness could be slowed, but the process for her has been unexpectedly rapid. That says nothing about you. Lexi is very happy and healthy. It's just the nature of the condition.
So there's nothing that can be done?
Lynn asked, tears blurring her vision.
I've been reading up on different developments. There is a surgeon who has been doing some impressive work and has had some success with patients similar to Lexi. But the treatment is still experimental and very expensive.
Of course it is.
Lynn finally broke down. Try as she might, as hard as she worked, it all came down to money and how much she would never have. Her children would always suffer because of her shortcomings.
It will be okay, Miss Carter.
Erica handed Lynn a tissue.
You raised a strong and intelligent daughter.
Alexis sat with a sigh. She supposed this day was inevitable. Ever since she was 6, her field of vision had rapidly diminished. Her peripheral narrowed, giving her tunnel vision, but that too eventually failed. Her world had faded into a gray mist. Telling light from dark was about all she was capable of doing. Though she was good at faking it, at least for her mother's sake.
Right this way, gentlemen. This is one of our waiting rooms. This floor is mainly for routine appointments and initial diagnosis.
The hospital director explained, as he led his guests through.
This area in particular is for our patients with sensory disabilities.
Oh, Director, could you look at this, please?
Pardon me?
The director excused himself to meet the nurse, hurrying up to him. With grunts, his guests remained at the nurse's station. Though Alexis could not see them, she knew they were there too. Both walked with a confidence born of someone who knew the world was theirs. Even more distinctive was their aftershave. One in particular was very expensive. She could tell by the complex nuances of the scent. Cheap cologne had a heavy, musky smell, strong enough to cause her to choke with one sniff. Her brothers often made fun of her obsession with smells, claiming she was part bloodhound. But it wasn't as if her sense of smell was any better or worse than theirs. She just paid more attention to it, because she couldn't rely on her sight. It was the same with her hearing. Their footsteps were distinctive. They were probably wearing loafers rather than sneakers. Even their clothing had a particular sound as it rubbed against itself while they waited. Most likely silk or satin, which meant they were probably wearing suits, and expensive ones at that. Even without her sight, she could glean a lot of information about the two men waiting nearby. They were alone, unaccompanied by children, so it was unlikely either were a parent of a patient. They were rich, or came from money, so even if they had children, she doubted they would use this hospital's services. The way the director was acting indicated they were probably investors, here to make a donation. "You know, it's rude to stare," a gruff male voice interrupted her internal debate.
Oh? I wouldn't know.
Alexis easily answered. "Excuse me? Who are you?" the man asked. His demand alone was enough to tell her he was someone used to getting what he wanted. It only made Alexis more determined to frustrate him. She didn't owe him answers, and she hated people who thought so highly of themselves they dismissed others. Those were the kinds of people where it was fun to take down a notch.
Who am I? Well, let's break this down, shall we? 1, I'm 10 years old, which makes me a child, according to modern convention. 2, this is a children's hospital, so it stands to reason I am a patient. 3, this waiting room is for appointments concerning vision and hearing impairment, which would mean your earlier comment about me staring was incredibly rude, don't you think?
"You're blind," he said, slowly putting the pieces together as she laid them out.
There, you see? That wasn't as hard to figure out.
Alexis said with a smile that caused her sightless green eyes to sparkle. The man's companion chuckled, saying,
She's got spunk. You have to give her that, sir.
"Where are your parents?" the first asked, more gently this time, though Alexis had no need for his sympathy.
Parent?
She corrected, though she didn't explain her absentee father.
Mom's talking to the doctor about whether or not I could get my sight back.
"Can you?"
If there's a way, I'm sure it's too expensive.
Alexis shrugged.
I'm fine the way I am.
The entire conversation was spoken in a matter-of-fact tone. Alexis came to grips with her vision loss long ago. That wasn't to say there wasn't things she missed, like her mother's face or her brother's. She could still picture them clearly when she was last able to see them, but that vision was like a time capsule. Alexis would never see them mature or age, except in her imagination.
I'm sorry about the wait, gentlemen. Oh, Lexi, are you here for an appointment?
Yep, I'm here for my 3,000-mile checkup.
She answered, and smiled in the direction of the hospital director.
How's your mother?
She's fine. She's talking to the Dr. Erica.
Good, good.
His voice took a dismissive tone.
If you need anything, let the nurses know.
Roger that.
Alexis saluted, feigning interest. The director was like most people, assuming her mother was some promiscuous slut, and that was as far as his interest in her went. Alexis overheard him solicit her mother once, despite the fact he was a married man. Her mother quickly ended the conversation and ushered Alexis away. Since then, she always had her guard up around him and saw no reason to be overly friendly with him. As long as he was civil, she would treat him in kind. If he stepped over the line, his wife would soon learn about his extramarital affair.
Shall we, gentlemen?
Goodbye, young lady, the man who had been talking to her said.
Later, old man.
Alexis shot back.
Mr. Prescott?
Director Weston asked as the others hesitated. Shaking his head, Silas let his retort go and followed after his host. Beside him, Thomas, his right-hand man and best friend, chuckled. What? Silas glared at him, but Thomas wasn't intimidated.
Never thought I'd see the day Mr. Big Bad Executive was intimidated by a child.
Silas grunted, though there was no denying it. The girl's attitude caught him off guard, not that he had much experience with children. Even so, he didn't think it was normal for one to be so brazen.
I hope Lexi didn't bother you,
Director Weston said.
She's a good kid. They all are.
They?
Her and her brothers. Triplets. They were born here, as a matter of fact, in our maternity ward. Interesting,
Thomas said.
It can't be easy to raise 3 children on your own, but their mother seems to handle it even with Lexi's medical needs.
What about their father?
He's never been in the picture.
Weston shook his head.
You think he abandoned his family?
Thomas asked as they reached the elevator. He was an avid mystery reader, and all puzzles intrigued him.
I can't say, and it's not my place to speculate on the lives of our patients,
Weston said. The elevator arrived, and the trio stepped on. Silas remained silent as Thomas conversed with their host. Something still bothered him about the young child who was the center of their conversation. Her attitude was not that of someone ashamed of their lot in life, despite the fact she came from a poor home. He did sense some resignation to hear her blindness. But it was not depressing in the least. All of this was to her credit, as far as Silas was concerned. He couldn't stand people who thought the world owed them something because they had been given a bad hand. Yet there was something off. There was something almost familiar about the girl he couldn't quite place. Her green eyes practically begged him to remember something important. While he debated this, he had watched the director interact with the girl. She treated him with equal sarcasm, which comforted Silas. For some reason, he didn't like the idea of the girl being friendly with someone else, which was ridiculous. But something about the director's attitude toward the girl irritated him. There was something almost licentious in his voice, which rubbed him the wrong way. Could the director be interested in her mother? Silas was certain the director was married, and the thought he might have carried on a relationship with the patient's parent disturbed him. Could the director be the girl's father? No. Silas dismissed the idea as soon as it was formulated. He didn't know why he cared, but for some reason, he hated the very idea that the director was in any way connected with the girl. For that reason, he remained silent as Thomas and their host spoke. Stepping onto the elevator, his mind still desperately tried to grasp a memory lost to him. As his gaze drifted outward, he saw the child stand as another figure arrived. The new figure was a petite woman wearing an oversized jacket over her waitress uniform. While the girl had straight hair, her mother had natural wavy hair that was secured in a half-up style. Reaching her daughter, the woman wrapped her in a hug, bowing her head. Why did he suddenly have the urge to rush to their side? The pair stood like that as the elevator closed. Only when they were out of sight did Silas shove away the strange yearning in his chest. Why was he reacting like this? They didn't have anything to do with him.
Are you okay, Mom?
Alexis asked, still wrapped in her mother's arms. Lynn didn't answer, immediately trying to control her tears. She hadn't realized how tightly she held on to the hope her daughter's sight would be saved until now. The doctor made Alexis's prognosis quite clear.
It's okay, Mom. I'm fine.
Alexis said, squeezing her tight.
Look on the bright side.
What is that?
Now I don't have to see my brother's stupid faces anymore.
Lynn chuckled. Her children never ceased to amaze her. The tears that threatened to fall dried up, and she managed a haggard breath before releasing Alexis from her embrace. Kissing the top of her head, Lynn said,
Come on, let's go. Let's celebrate.
Yeah? Celebrate what?
Celebrate the fact that you won't have to watch your brothers stuff their faces when we bring them McDonald's.
Alexis giggled.
That sounds good, Mom.
With an arm around her shoulder, Lynn directed her daughter toward the exit. They were far from being okay. Alexis knew her mother would put on a brave face in front of them, saving her tears for a private moment. But eventually, her mother would accept the truth. Alexis and her brothers would watch their mother for a while and be careful not to upset her until then, which meant it was a good thing their mother didn't know their weekend plans.
The Billionaire Triplets Take New York. Written by E.T. Watson. Narrated by Daniel Cuddy and Celia Stone and Lucy Topps and Jim Swanson. Chapter 3. Silas sighed as he took his seat in his reserved booth. At least here, he no longer had to worry about people bothering him. No matter where he went, people accosted him hoping to win a powerful ally or patron. It was even worse among this crowd. Tonight was the All Boroughs Music Competition. It started out as a charity and friendly competition for public and private schools to show off their most talented musicians. There were trophies, as well as a cash prize for the winning school in the form of a scholarship to the school's music program. Over the years, it had become more elite. Fewer schools participated now, and the ones that did were mainly private and charter schools. The scholarship was still offered, but now the main prize was bragging rights, as well as automatic advancement to the All-City Music Festival the following spring. Like any businessman, Silas was always careful to balance his charitable donations and activities with his business interests. That was one of the reasons he agreed to Director Weston's request for a sponsor to a new wing for the hospital. It was also the reason why he was here. He never missed any notable musical competition or recital that took place throughout the year. His continued presence to such events naturally brought him plenty of attention. Not surprisingly, many people encouraged their children to participate, hoping to impress him and garner favoritism before approaching him with business proposals. Silas certainly couldn't criticize their ingenuity, but that wasn't why he was here. He came to these events to relax, to remember, and maybe, just maybe, to find someone.
Something the matter?
Thomas asked, standing at the ready should he need anything. Despite the fact that they were friends, they were also employer and employee.
That kid from the other day must have really thrown you for a loop.
Silas grunted, his mind returning to the strange, brave girl from the children's hospital. There was no denying she often came to mind at the oddest moments. She was brazen and without fear, full of pride, and not afraid to speak her mind even to a complete stranger. But it was her green eyes that simply wouldn't let him rest. They drew him in, practically demanding him to remember something important. If only the director hadn't come back when he did, Silas felt if he'd been given a little more time, his mind would have finally deciphered that uncanny feeling that made his hair stand on end. Even now his thoughts hovered over a precipice he didn't dare cross.
It's nothing,
Silas finally said.
Let's just enjoy the night.
Fine with me.
Thomas agreed, but couldn't help giving his friend a concerned look. At almost 30, Silas Prescott enjoyed more success and privilege than most people twice his age could hope for. But this didn't bring him joy. Money and power were not the things Silas treasured or coveted. What Silas wanted, what he needed, what he never voiced aloud was a family, wife, and children. Ever since high school, Silas had been pursued by a number of girls and women. Some he soundly rejected, others he entertained but never took seriously. None succeeded in touching his heart, a heart that was reserved for one woman and one woman only. Her name was permanently etched in Silas's soul, and one he never voiced aloud. Thomas was afraid to even mention it himself. Despite his obsession, the object of his desire remained hidden and out of his reach. Mercifully, the lights dimmed, freeing them from further conversation as the host appeared on stage to welcome the audience.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 48th Annual All Boroughs Music Competition. We have over 100 participants from 30 schools competing this year, our biggest yet. So, let's sit back and enjoy. To start things off, we have Birch Wathen's String Quartet.
The crowd clapped politely as 3 young boys and 1 girl walked on stage to take their places. It took a few minutes for them to prepare their instruments and sheet music. Then they finally began to play. Once they finished, the crowd politely clapped again, and they exited to join their family and friends in the audience. Stagehands moved chairs and music stands, preparing for the next act before it was announced. And so the night progressed. Some schools were represented by a single musician, others by a whole band. This particular competition did not put limits on participation. As a result, schools with more resources sent larger groups for a more impressive presentation. Silas watched impassively. Despite his record of attendance, he was no lover of the arts or of music in particular. The musicians on stage were a far cry from professionals, so he didn't expect much from their performances either. He came because a single vision drove him to. A vision and a belief he would eventually find what he was looking for. Not surprisingly, Riverdale had sent an entire orchestra to deliver the crowning moment of the night. Despite being his alma mater, Silas was not impressed. He sensed nothing special in these children who were undoubtedly the sons and daughters of his own classmates.
Well, I suppose that's it.
Thomas sighed. After the last competitor, there would be a brief intermission before the winners were announced, but Silas never stayed that long. He always left early to avoid over-eager parents hoping their children's performances impressed him.
And now for the final competitor of the night, Anna Silver Public School, Miss Alexis Carter. Seriously?
Thomas scoffed.
Why would they make anyone follow that?
The crowd seemed to agree. Some had already headed for the doors in anticipation of the break when the announcement was made. Their surprise only deepened as a young girl in a simple black dress with pinstripe sleeves emerged from off stage. In her hand, she carried a long, flexible cane she swept back and forth in front of her, as she made her way across the stage.
All right, Lexi! Go, Lexi, go!
Cheers erupted somewhere in the crowd as the blind but proud young lady made it center stage where the piano waited. Her cane bumped the bench, and she bowed slightly, touching the bench before she sat. With practiced ease, she closed her cane and set it on the piano, where sheet music would normally be, but of course, there was none. Under the audience's scrutiny, she ran her fingers across the keys, tapping one as she adjusted her seat and made herself comfortable. She took a breath, then began to play. The moment the girl appeared on stage, Silas and Thomas immediately recognized her. Thomas looked to his friend, but Silas was fully focused on the girl. Why was she here? Was it a sign? What did it mean? Then she began to play. The piece was instantly recognizable. Beethoven's 𝘵𝘺𝘴, even if one didn't know it by name. In fact, 5 of the other competitors had also played the piece, but this was different. She had no sheet music, so she played by memory alone. And more than that, she didn't just play the piece as it had originally been composed. The melody was there, but she added her own flourishes, comprising new and different octaves, making the piece more complex, personal, and alive. She swayed with the rhythm of her music, eyes half closed, with a serene expression of pure love and joy for the music. The melody built up to an amazing crescendo, sweeping over her listeners entranced with her playing. Silas himself was on the edge of his seat, captivated. Once, only once, he had heard such masterful playing. It too was played by a young lady on the verge of womanhood. Her hair was a bountiful mane of rich chestnut hair, and her eyes were a clear, sparkling green. Visions of her playing flitted in his mind, overlapping with the one in front of him now. The vision fit like mirror images. Aside from the fact the girl in front of him had straight hair, it was a perfect match. But that was impossible. Unless... He twitched as a sudden pain enveloped his chest. No, it couldn't be. Not that. Anything but that. Her playing naturally tapered off after its climax. Slowly the girl straightened, relaxing as the melody slowed. Removing her left hand, she finished with her right hand, gently tapping out the same signature note she started with, letting them hang in the air like a question. Satisfied, she picked up her cane and scooted to the end of the bench. Standing, she bowed once to the audience before extending the cane and turned, leaving the same way she had entered. For several moments, the crowd watched in stunned awe until a sharp whistle and cheer erupted from a dark corner.
Yeah, Lexi! Whoop, whoop, whoop!
The crowd stirred, rising to their feet, and applauding in the first and only standing ovation of the night. Quietly exiting the stage, the girl did not pause, but she smiled broadly.
Boss? Silas?
The girl. Find her. Bring her here.
How? I mean, it's not like she'll recognize me.
I don't care how. Bring her.
Silas snapped.
Right.
Thomas turned and promptly left their private box. By the time he reached the entry hall, at least half of the competitors and their parents were mingling over the refreshments provided. Thomas was not as recognizable as Silas, and the gathered crowd ignored him as he threaded his way through. He scanned the gathering, but finding a single girl among so many was impossible, and he still didn't know what he would say to her.
Hey, Lexi! Over here, sis.
Thomas paused, his eyes drawn toward the voices. In a relatively quiet corner, he saw a pair of young boys identical down to their shoes. Both had black hair and blue eyes, a rare combination. Both wore a plain white dress shirt, black slacks and tennis shoes, even though it was supposed to be a black tie affair. Their short hair was a bit shaggy and fell into their eyes, but that didn't seem to bother them. Thomas stood transfixed. The boys looked so much like someone else, he thought he was caught in a time warp. As stunned as he was, he still brought out his phone, snapping quick pictures of the pair, as a tall blonde beside them tried to keep them quiet.
You two are so stupid.
A new voice declared as the girl Thomas had been sent to retrieve reached the trio.
Did you hear us cheering?
One of the boys asked.
Of course I did. All of Brooklyn heard you.
Alexis laughed as the pair enveloped her in a hug.
What did you think, Aunt Tracy? Was I good? Sweetie, you played just like your mother,
the blonde said.
She would be so proud. It's a shame she had to work late tonight. It's fine. I don't think she'd like this crowd, and you know what she says about music. It doesn't put food on the table.
Alexis sighed. Her aunt grimaced, replying.
She didn't used to be that way, you know. Is that why you swore me to secrecy about where we were going tonight? This was Miss Johnson's idea, to try get money for the school's music program.
Alexis explained.
Mom would never agree to it, so that's why Sean forged her signature on the permission slip.
Which is also secret.
One of the boys declared.
I swear on my oath as a lawyer not to reveal anything my client tells me in confidence,
Tracy said.
But if your mother finds out, she's going to kill me. So let's make sure she doesn't find out.
Alexis held out her pinky. Both boys and their aunt hooked their pinkies around hers.
We never speak of this night. Ever.
The others declared.
Are you hungry?
Tracy asked.
Not for anything here.
Alexis shook her head.
We should get back before everyone else. It's hard enough navigating this place without the crowd. All right, let's go.
Tracy agreed. Each boy hooked one of their sister's arms. Since before they could remember, they had always done this, and always in the same order. Sean on her left and Theo on her right. In the middle, Alexis couldn't use her cane, but she also didn't need to. She knew her brothers wouldn't let anything happen to her. With their aunt trailing them, they returned to the auditorium, unaware of the observer taking pictures. Thomas returned to his anxiously waiting friend. Silas nearly leapt out of his seat, demanding,
Where is she?
Shaking his head, Thomas answered.
There were people waiting for her. I couldn't sneak her away.
People waiting? Who?
Her brothers and aunt, I think.
Aunt? Not her mother?
No, I took pictures.
Thomas took out his phone and queued up the first image before handing it over. Seeing the two boys, Silas sucked in a breath. Black hair, blue eyes. Even the slope of their noses and angle of their jaws matched his own. The resemblance was more than uncanny. There could be no denying their parentage. He didn't need a DNA test to prove it. No one would.
Director did say they were triplets, and the girl said she was 10.
Thomas said. He was no expert, but certainly triplets were not an everyday event, especially with identical twin boys and a fraternal sister. Silas flipped through the photos, watching as the boys greeted their sister, enveloping her in a double hug that was more like a huddle. It was obvious there were strong bonds between them. His gaze eventually settled on the blonde in close attendance.
Who is this?
Their aunt?
Thomas said.
At least they called her Aunt Tracy.
Tracy.
Silas repeated. He racked his mind trying to recall his classmates. Was there a Tracy?
I think she's a lawyer.
Lawyer?
Yeah, something she said. About her oath never to reveal her client's secrets.
Thomas said.
I think she was actually telling the truth.
Lawyer. Tracy.
Silas muttered. Something about that sounded familiar, but his mind had suffered too many shocks to connect the dots. The lights dimmed, and the night's host appeared on stage as the last stragglers returned to their seats. Tapping his microphone, the announcer asked,
And now, we have come to the moment you have all been waiting for. Third place goes to...
Silas wasn't listening. His focus was on the pictures Thomas had taken. He couldn't stop looking at them. How? How could this be? Unless... No, that was impossible.
And tonight's grand prize goes to the Riverdale Pep Band.
Silas looked up at the mention of his alma mater. His mind was numb, but even he knew the wrongness in the announcement. How could they have won against Alexis' superb playing? He wasn't the only one confused if the sporadic applause was anything to go by.
How does bringing the most people constitute a win?
Thomas muttered. They weren't the only ones unsatisfied.
Boo! Boo! I demand a recount. Yeah, someone shoot the judges. Are they deaf or just dumb? Yo, the judges have been paid off. Boo!
Sean, Theo.
Tracy tried to shush them.
Come on, you two.
But Auntie, this is a crock.
Theo insisted.
Lexi was clearly the best. Right, sis?
It's fine. We knew it was a long shot.
Alexis shook her head.
Come on. Let's beat the crowd out of here.
Still unsatisfied, the boys nonetheless acquiesced to their sister, helping her out of her seat and down the row. Luckily, they had chosen seats on the end and close to the door. They left the auditorium as it erupted with murmurs and gossip. No one could deny they had witnessed something magical, as well as a crime of favoritism. Whether they knew it or not, the trio had made a lasting impression and started an inquiry that would overturn the competition's directorship. None of this meant anything to the trio, but another inquiry certainly would, as Silas turned to his friend.
I want to know everything about those three, and I want it yesterday.